I'm Chris Medico, and I'm representing the Whatcom County Library System, the Point Roberts Library, and the Point Roberts Historical Society. So this is our third year actually of this old house stuff. And so these are some of the, I have something here for people who haven't come before, and it's just a little pop quiz. The answers are on the pop quiz.
First time.
Want to pass them around here? Thank you. So, yeah.
There with the house?
There with the house, they are.
This is about eccentric locals.
You brought this, you found it.
Pardon?
You found it?
No, it's in historical science files.
Yeah.
It's this chap lived in that house. By his father.
And this is his son?
And that's his
Hello.
brother.
Oh, his brother.
I can tell you,
Chris will probably explain.
this is the house that we want to talk about. It's the Samualson house, and it's located on the corner of Tyee and Benson. It's on the northeast corner. And I think you probably all passed it on your way down Tyee Drive. It doesn't want to stand up, but there it is. Yes. And so I had some other things that I had prepared for the times when nobody came. I'll just tell you about that. I had some rocks to pass around, and you have no doubt noticed big rocks on the beaches, in the fields. There's a huge one on the field at Tyee and APA Road. And these are rocks that the glacier left behind when the glacier covered all this area. And when it receded, leaving Point Roberts an island, it left behind all of those stones, and they're called erratics because they're not part of the native soil. So everybody had a rock and they could put it on their soil.
I've been calling them eccentric, Chris.
Eccentrics, they're eccentrics. I think that even fits better. Yes, that's good. And so when the Fraser River Delta began to fill in the area, it eventually joined Point Roberts, and it all became one big landmass. And it was well known to all of the native Indian tribes. The fishing grounds were famous. They came all the way from the Lily Point around to Boundary Bay, and there's still native tribes fishing on Lily Point today. They come and make camp there. But this was the time of reef nets, fish traps. It was just a multitude of wealth. The Icelanders came in a very roundabout way. They had practically no opportunities in Iceland, and times were severe. They were starving and they were out of work, so they heard of western places. They came via Ellis Island or via the St. Lawrence River. They stopped in North Dakota. They stopped in Winnipeg. There's still a huge Icelandic community in Gimli, Manitoba. And then they came to Vancouver, Victoria, Seattle, Blaine. The ones that went to Victoria were not treated all that well. And one of them, who was going to Victoria, changed his name. It was, his last name was Sivert Gjerson. And it just seemed, I know this is terrible, but it just seemed that that was not a really good name to be sprouting, taunting around in a country that was a little anti-Icelandic immigrants. So he changed his name to Seaver, but when he came through immigration, the guy in immigration put a little Z behind it, and he didn't know enough English to kind of correct that, so he was Sieverts for the rest of his life. He went on to become a very well-known Canadian in the postal union movement in Victoria. And he married a lady, I don't remember her first name, Ingeborg, not Ingeborg, but Endeberg. It ended in Berg. And she was a Samuelson. So that brings the Samuelson part into it. The Samuelsons heard about Point Roberts. Everybody heard about Point Roberts. And at one time the Sievertses came to Point Roberts after their family home burned, and they stayed about 2 years. Well, in the meantime, Jonas Samuelson had come. I'm not sure if that's his real last name, but he had a son named Samuel. He married, and he had these 3 sons. Well, wait, that's him sitting. These are his 3 sons. And this is their stepmother. Now, their stepmother was a Sieverts connection, and that's why I mention it. It took me forever to figure out how this went, but they have written 2 books, Sieverts 1 and Sieverts 2, family books. And so I find that this was John Sieverts here with all his family, and his sister was also with him. His sister, I'm only going to say this once because it is very confusing. His sister came to Point Roberts, and she married a man named Whalen, which we believe was old Pat Whalen, and he died, and she was left rather destitute. Eventually, Jonas Samuelson, his wife had died, and this was like his sister-in-law. So she came to his home and took care of his boys. Her name was Ingeborg. She was known as Emma, and she was their aunt by marriage but eventually Jonas married her. So she was a mother to these boys, and you can see the affection in their eyes as they look there. Now, I talked to the person who's currently living in the Samuelson house, and they found the old plans for the building. They were ordered from Sears. And then the people just constructed them from the plans, and I'm sure there was more than a few houses here in Point Roberts done like that. And they're just very typical farmhouses. And like the farmhouse that I grew up in, there's tall ceilings. The present owner, Dan Brandt, the ceilings had been lowered, probably for heating reasons, because those are hard houses to heat. So they took out all the lowered ceilings, and they restored the high ceilings. They paneled it in dark wood. That looks marvelous. And there between the ceiling and the upstairs is one of those vents that they had in our old house. And you could open it to let heat up, or you could open it to eavesdrop on the visitors below, which was really what it was mostly used for. It was great growing up in that house. So the Samuelsons lived in this house, and they had a daughter named Laura. Laura married Jules, which one is this, Jules?
Yes, on this side.
On this side? That's Jules?
Yes.
Okay. She married Jules, and he worked on the fish traps out here, and they were singers. The whole family was very musically inclined. So sometimes working out there on the fish traps, he would start a song. He had a baritone voice. And Jonas Thorstensen, he would sing in a really deep bass. And then the others would join in. His brothers would join in. And so they'd be heard singing across the waters on quiet nights. And that was a memory that Lola remembered and wanted to make sure everybody else got to hear about. They didn't live in Point Roberts too long. Jules had injured his back, and he found a job in Bellingham, I believe, teaching. And he well, one of the brothers was a teacher here at this school, and he's featured in that picture looking over the filing cabinets.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, that was Ted, I believe. And I could be wrong, but anyway. So
We don't know. That's fine.
It's good. It's all good. Anyway, they moved to Bellingham and their house became I assume was rented out. I know at one time the Sands family from Point Roberts lived there. They were Icelandic Norwegian. And I remember when Larry Sands lived there with his wife and kids. Then much later on, Erica Lorraine, granddaughter to Laura, lived there, and she loved it. She said you could sit out on the front porch and see everybody going by. And it was just nice. So the people that lived in it for about 25 years, and the man who still lives there, they have loved it too. And there's a white rose bush there that has a little story. The former wife of the man who lives there, Deb Brandt, I think is still her name. You can find her working in Nielsen's, but she said her grandmother had walked all the way from the East Coast to California. And when she got there, she had a house and she established a beautiful white rose. And her daughter got a slip of that and established that same rose. And Deb got a slip of it, and she had it planted around the back of this house, and it's still there today. So I was going to go and pick some of it. Time is of the essence. So
Chris, is Lola Lorraine a Samuelson?
she is.
Oh.
Yeah, she's part Samuelson. Yeah, and her mother's, I can't remember her mother's last name. But,
Johansson, Chris.
Johansson. Okay, so there you go. And there's the sisters still live here on Point Roberts, some of them. Erica still lives here with her family. Val Lorraine lives here with her family. Her girls are now grown up. Everybody's children are now grown up. And Dana comes often. She lives in Victoria, but she often comes to see her parents. And of course, Erica and Val and Dana's mother and father are Laura and Ernie Lorraine. So that's what I know and can fully relate about that house. So did you all take your quiz?
I took it last week.
She took it last week. She knows
I took it last week too.
She knows all the answers, so does Dana.
Except
Yeah.
So who was the first and only Chinese settler here? We talked about him last year, and his name was Ah Fat. And he was a man who the community protected from the purge that went on in the rest of the county in the 1890s.
His house was at Lighthouse Point.
Okay, and his house was at Lighthouse Point.
Yeah.
And you can see up here in this map, off that residence right there.
Oh. Wow. 1904.
Yeah, and he didn't, he was one of the few settlers that didn't want the rights to his property because he said he had no wife and no children to pass it on to. So in 1908, when everybody got their permission to stay on the land that they'd homesteaded, he wasn't one of them. But he had a restaurant down at the bottom of Gulf Road, and he was a prominent figure here. People enjoyed his food. It's the first time they'd ever had Chinese. And erratics are not cyclists who take up the whole road, and not eccentric locals, but boulders left behind by a glacier. Or all of the above, as you wish. And this building, which replaced the old school, was a WPA project, a Works Project Association thing established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt as his way to help make work for people during the Depression.
So it replaced the old school.
It did, because the old school was right beside this building,
Oh.
And they wanted to improve it, but there were no funds for improving it. But there were funds through this WPA to build a new building, and that's what they did.
It was the old school wooden structure too, and
Yeah.
it was wooden.
So this has stood ever since. It's had
But
its,
this was a school as well.
this was a school as well. I went to school here. I can testify to that. Bunny went to school here, right? Maybe
Yes, I
not.
did.
Yes, you did. Okay.
Wow.
I know. We're
You
old.
both passed. You passed.
Apparently.
No, finish as soon as you pass school.
Yes.
Yeah,
Eventually, the
you're
school.
still alive.
Eventually, the school only went to grade 6, and after grade 6, the kids all went by bus tonight. And then eventually, there were only 11 children eligible for school, and they closed it, and everybody went to Blaine. And then way back in the 90s, it was opened again when they decided to have a school for younger children here. And for about 9 months, it was a school. One of the rooms was used as a schoolroom before they built the one up near Bakersfield. So they still have that school functioning, and it goes from kindergarten to grade 3, and then they go to Blaine. Or parents have often put them in schools, in Canadian schools. So,
I've come to the garage sale, but how many rooms does it have up there?
I think it's got about 5 or 6 rooms. I'm not sure.
Classroom.
Well, I think what it has is some classrooms that are divided, so maybe kindergarten and first grade share a room, and so do second and third. Because usually there's between 13 to 17 students at any given time in all of the grades.
Yeah.
So,
And then there are like 3 rooms that are you can divide up,
yeah,
and then there's a couple smaller rooms so they can work individually with
it was
the
made
kids.
in so it
Wow.
could be.
And one big room where you can run around.
Yeah, well, that's
Oh, yeah,
one.
I think they don't have a gym.
Well, they
Well, they have a playroom.
They have
they have a playroom out there.
But not like
it's like
a-
a garage. It's built like a garage. You can lift the doors up.
Oh, that's where they have the garage sale.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
that's what they use for their out when it's raining. They
They only have 70 kids, remember?
Yes.
So,
Well, they've got a lot. And APA stands for Alaska Packers Association. I once went down to California, down to Fisherman's Wharf, and there at the very end near the Maritime Museum was this big old boat. And I thought, big old boat. Oh, it's an Alaska Packers original boat.
oh, wow.
And so I got to walk all through it, and they were big. And they came into the docks down there at the end of Lily Point and uploaded and unloaded, and it was quite the going concern. And so, the famous country store that stood at the corner of Tahiti and Gulf,
Ben's.
Ben's store. That was mainly the store. Sometimes there were other stores in the summer, or they lasted for a few years, because there was a general store in Boundary Bay at one time. There was one at South Beach, but Ben's store was the one fixture that was always there.
What did Ben sell?
Pardon me?
What did Ben sell?
Where did they sell?
No, what did he sell? What?
Everything.
Anything.
Gas, food, clothing, everything.
It was a general store.
Yeah.
He was the store.
It was the store that you went to. And then when gasoline got so high in Canada for Canadians to buy, several entrepreneurs figured out they could have gas stations here. So 5 were built. And some of them were kind of like 7-Eleven stores. And so it was competition for Ben's. And then the big marketplace came in. And that kind of was their death knell. But they stayed going for quite some time. They changed ownership from Ben Thorderson to Flo Gladue, or Bert Gladeau. The Juliuses had it. And then the Hammers had it. And it survived being driven straight into by a misguided resident one night and rose again. But eventually that was it. And so they sold, and that's now where USA Gas was, and I don't remember the name of the station that's there now. Exxon? Exo.
Oh, it's a Mobile.
Mobile.
How do you say Mobile?
Mobile.
Mobile. Okay, so that's where they were. there's another old house right beside it that someday should be featured. It belonged to Runa Thorderson, and it was, she had the most beautiful garden. She belonged to the Evergreen Garden Club, and she and my grandmother, who was Canadian and belonged, they had fierce competitions between them and Anna Baker, who had a complete fish pond. I think Runa did too. It was, they passed around this trophy year after year with just their names on it.
The fish pond is being restored.
Is it? That would be lovely. Yeah. Where should you always take Icelandic visitors?
The graveyard, cemetery.
The cemetery. And you show them the tombstones with the Icelandic names on it, and they are moved to tears. And they really appreciate it. When the Icelandic president came here, she was taken there and she was very moved, and there's a plaque there in her honor.
I have a question.
Yep.
Does anyone know what are they building across there?
Oh, I
It
don't know.
looks like a horse thing or
It's just
It's a construction
private
yard.
facility.
We're trying to figure out
It's a
what's
construction
outside.
facility.
A construction
It's
facility.
a contractor, and he's been using it for storage. That's
Who's
all I
that?
heard. I don't know which one it is,
Okay.
in the old granite pit.
but yeah.
Okay.
They're making it pretty fancy for
Yeah.
just that.
Yeah, it's very elaborate.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
I heard they're just using it for storage.
I heard a rumor.
Oh, what is
That's
it?
a rumor.
The building was large because he couldn't get a permit for a house. And so he built this storage facility, and now he's building his house inside it.
I like that.
I like that.
That's very typical Point Roberts right there.
So you can take that for what it's worth.
Getting around the county is a very typical Point Roberts endeavor. And then Innisfree, Tam O'Shanter, Dunworkin, Green Gables, and Come On In are the common names of what?
Cottages at Maple Bay.
Yeah.
Yes, they
Maple
are.
Beach, yeah.
Yeah,
Maple
and
Beach Cabin.
probably
Maple
they
Beach.
have some names for the ones on Freeman's Beach, but I don't know. And name two famous taverns that stood at the foot of Gulf Road.
Breakers and the, well, the Reef's.
The Reef.
The Reef.
The Reef's still there,
Yeah.
Breakers closed. And back when you couldn't buy beer on Sundays, and beer was much cheaper here, the lineup coming up to the border would be just like it is today on a Sunday, all the way down the hill. And people would come over, have their free beer, and trot on home. And it's changed a lot because now there's beer on Sundays in Canada, and the pubs are open all the time. And you just can't be drinking and driving in either area anymore. The police are they really stepped up the laws because they tightened things up. I remember one of the Canadian customs officers, he'd be coming up the hill in front of us and he'd be going like this. Everybody just,
Sway with
oh
the
yeah,
music.
that's that. Name the local quilter whose work hangs on these walls.
Judy.
Judy Rush. What did the southern catfish say about the orcapod? Whale, whale.
Gonna do that in the joke selling contest?
So often now, it's not, nobody's laughing. So, this is all I have on the Samuelsons. Bunny knows a little bit more, and she's got the book.
Just
Kind of the Bible. Show them the name of that book. It's
This is
called
called
Icelanders on the Pacific Coast.
And it's based on the work of one woman, Margaret Benedictson, who came from Iceland, the usual story. And her home was in Blaine. And she made it her business, year after year after year, to visit all the Icelanders in their homes and then record what was happening in the family, who they were, what their genealogy was.
Wow.
And this was in Point Roberts, Blaine, and Bellingham. And it was all in Icelandic because it was being sent back to Iceland. So a group of people worked very, very hard, people in Seattle actually, and people in Blaine, to transcribe it into English. And so we have, as a result, quite a thorough record on Point Roberts of who was here in 1925. So,
I have a question about the Samuelsons. I know different families had different. Some families did chickens, some did cattle. Do you know what they were farming? It was a farm.
They had
Or was it?
everything, I think, because they had a huge barn.
everyone had a cow, at least, or two
They had a
cows.
huge barn, and this is the picture of the shed that they had when it was all falling down, and Judy did a quilt of it before it was actually derelict completely. And I think they did what everybody did. They had some animals to raise.
Oh, well, some people
fished.
did. Some people. I know some people did. Some people did. They had the one family had a
coops.
mill. Some people had a lot more chickens. And,
Yeah.
During the Second World War, when eggs were very scarce, everyone on Point Roberts was raising chickens. Shipping the eggs to Bellingham.
Good to know.
And the cream. They were
From the
skimming
cattle?
the cream, separating it, and sending cream cans to Bellingham to make butter, because there was such a shortage of...
so it was mostly dairy cows that they had out here.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, even there was a big barn in our place, and then every year the only occupant was a calf that my dad would get at the beginning of the season and have butchered at the end of the season, and the meat was stored in lockers, frozen in Blaine.
In Blaine, Chris?
In Blaine. Yeah. And then there got to be a huge scam on people doing that. They'd show you the beef hanging. It looked marvelous. You could put the pencil with the eraser end right deep into that meat. It was so tender. But then you never knew what that was that they actually saved for you. And there was no way to tell. And that there was a big scandal down in Seattle about that. That ended that kind of industry, because you began to doubt that was bully boy that you had raised or not.
And then they opened the freezer in Ladner,
Yeah,
which was...
yeah. And you could go out, you could drive out to Ladner and get meat. We did that every week. Got ground round, hot dogs, and I think that was about it. Yeah. So, any questions? Any other questions? All right. Is there a house or a place that you would like to heard of?
You passed this around. There's some place at the dance hall, he says.
There was a
that-
dance hall.
That's not, is it still
It's
standing?
no.
No.
When you go down to Boundary Bay, you're on Bayview Drive, the main drive.
Yeah.
And you're heading towards Canada. And right there where there are now condominiums was a store called Metcalf's, and it had food, fish and chips, and a big dance hall. And that's where the kids went dancing. And young fellas would be driving up and down the road cruising. It's just a short stretch, but there was that. There was a couple other stores. There was the skating rink, and it was like the place you snuck out to go to.
Did they also do dances at the Grange Hall?
Yeah, that's
Yes,
why
of course.
that's why I thought that was the dance
Yeah.
hall.
But there was another older dance hall
Ah.
and general store at Boundary Bay owned by the Waters family.
Oh.
And it burned down in the 1930s
Huh.
and was never replaced by another dance hall.
And the Glenfield Lodge, it says?
That was like in the 30s. You see that picture with all the cars up there? Well, some of the touring cars came from a lodge in Vancouver, and they take people out for the day to Point Roberts to the Glenfield Lodge in Point Roberts, and the cabin with that was part of Glenfield Lodge is still a fixture in Boundary Bay. So
Hasn't changed a lot.
I don't know. I saw the picture and I thought, oh yeah, I've seen that place, but I hadn't.
So it's like a hotel?
Yeah, it was a
And
little
then
place to go
he's
stay.
got Silver Sands.
Silver Sands. I'm not sure. Roger Nottingham and his wife Anne Nottingham were here one of the times, and we just had a long talk about the places down there and that was one of them, and he was suggesting that we do some research into that.
But
That
It
wasn't
was down in
Weatherfield
Maple
Lodge
Beach.
earlier, Chris? I can't,
It could have been.
I don't know.
I don't remember.
Really.
Yeah.
okay.
So.
Yeah, you need to get some of the old Maple.
I've heard of
Beach
Clark's
families
story and
here,
Whalen's
so-
story, but those three.
And Roger and Ann had a walk-through of a lot of the old cabins in Boundary Bay a few years back. And did up history and stuff. Yeah, so.
Um,
Oh, there was another thing I was going to say. If you're out in the woods and you see a huge old snag burned up, but it's still, you can still see it was cedar. There was a huge forest fire that ripped through Point Roberts towards the end of the 1890s or the very beginning of the 1900s, and it left behind these cedars that are just still standing there, about 16 feet high maybe, and they're all charred. And everywhere you see them, they're usually plowed under for a house to be put in. But that's how they came about. Yeah. And then about the natives that used this area, at one time. Brian Fairfax from the University of UBC came out and told my mom. She was interested in a lot of folks, and they always came to visit her, and he told her he thought he knew where an old longhouse was. And he took her to the border, up Roosevelt Road, just to where it starts to get woody. And we all walked through the grass to into the woods there, and it did look like there might be the remains of a longhouse there. And my mom was really impressed. She took off her glasses and set them down on the log, and that's where they still are. And we could never find the path again to go out there. So that was it.
Was this the east or the west side? Of
It was on the
Tye?
Canadian side.
It was on the Canadian side.
Yeah.
On top of the hill or down below? Chris?
Down below, like
Yeah.
where it starts getting woody.
It's
It was
after
right there.
after Province, but right as it's starting to go up the hill.
Oh, just like at the bottom of Snake
At,
Hill.
at
Well,
the
they-
bottom of Snake Hill, but further up.
Oh, that's
before
where
it starts
my
rising.
that's where my
Yeah,
property
before it starts
is.
rising.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
On the
it's right
Canadian
across the
side.
street from there.
On the Canadian
Yeah.
side.
Well, they've had archaeological digs in there. There's a lot of treasure in there. That's why that part hasn't really been developed. It's my understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
And somebody said that they'd found some artifacts in that new business that they're building just below the hill, where all that lovely black earth is. And wouldn't be surprised after hearing that. That perhaps
Because
there
the
are.
tide would have come up to that
Yeah.
level and they would have
Yeah.
camped right there.
And the huge middens that were down at Boundary Bay, everywhere there's a hill in Boundary Bay, that was once part of an Indian midden.
Yeah.
Some of them have been flattened, some of them have been excavated, but they're still there. When I say huge, it like went blocks. Blocks and blocks. And mostly people just built over them. Pretended they didn't see that skeleton or that bone.
It's been going on for thousands of years.
Yeah.
3,000, I think.
No, I'm not just there. I mean, everywhere.
Oh.
You just build over whatever's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tendency. And around the 1870s, there was the west side of Point Roberts was a stopover point for people on their way to the gold rush in the Fraser River. And there was a little town there called Robertstown, but it was short-lived. There was also said to be a hanging tree nearby, and there's rumored photographs of it. But it's no longer there. So, if you've got any other questions. I'm done.